The rain fell hard that November evening, drumming against the cracked pavement of East Monroe Street like 1,000 tiny fists demanding to be heard. Streetlights flickered amber through the downpour, casting long shadows across empty storefronts and chain-link fences. This part of the city had been forgotten by most, where potholes went unfilled and hope seemed to drain with every storm. Officer Derek Kane sat in his patrol car, windshield wipers cutting through the rain in a steady rhythm. His jaw was tight, his eyes scanning the wet streets with the practiced intensity of a man who'd spent 15 years believing that order and justice were the same thing. To him, the law was a wall, solid, unyielding, unquestionable. He'd built his entire career on that belief. And tonight, that belief would be tested. A sedan, old, dented, brake light flickering, rolled through the intersection ahead. Derek's eyes narrowed. He flipped on his lights, the blue and red glow slicing through the rain like a blade. The car hesitated, then slowly pulled to the side of the road. Derek grabbed his flashlight and stepped out into the storm. Cold rain soaked through his uniform almost immediately, but he didn't flinch. He approached the driver's side window, tapping it twice with the back of his knuckle. The window rolled down. Inside sat a black woman in her late 50s, her hands gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2. She wore a faded nursing scrubs top beneath a thin jacket, and her eyes, tired, kind, patient, met his without fear, only quiet resignation. "License and registration," Derek said, his voice flat. She nodded slowly and reached for her glove compartment. Her movements were careful, deliberate. She'd done this before. "Do you know why I stopped you, ma'am?" "My brake light, I think," she said softly. Her voice was gentle, worn smooth by years of speaking softly to people in pain. "I've been meaning to get it fixed, just haven't had the time." Derek shone his flashlight into the backseat. Empty fast food bags, a hospital badge on a lanyard, a Bible with frayed edges. He looked back at her. Something in her eyes made him pause just for a moment, but then he remembered the wall, the law, the line that couldn't be crossed. "Step out of the vehicle, please." The rain poured harder, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled like a warning no one was listening to. Her name was Evelyn Harper, though most people just called her Miss Evie. For 32 years, she'd worked the night shift at St. Michael's Hospital, caring for patients who had no one else. She knew the names of their children, their favorite songs, the stories that made them smile when the pain got too heavy to bear. She lived alone in a small apartment on the east side, the kind of place where neighbors looked out for each other because no one else would. Her car was older than some of the residents on her floor, held together by duct tape, prayer, and the stubbornness of a woman who refused to ask for help she couldn't repay. Tonight she was on her way home after a double shift. Her feet ached, her back throbbed, but her heart was full. She'd held the hand of a dying man until his daughter arrived, and that was worth every hour of exhaustion. She hadn't noticed the brake light was out until last week. The repair shop quoted her $300. She'd been saving $10 at a time, tucked into an envelope in her kitchen drawer. Almost there. But now, standing in the rain beside her car, water streaming down her face, she felt the weight of the world pressing harder than it should. Officer Kane circled her vehicle slowly, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. He crouched near the back bumper, inspecting the brake light. Then he moved to the front, checking her registration sticker. Expired. 2 months expired. He stood and walked back to her, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "You're driving with a broken brake light and expired registration," he said. "That's 2 violations." Evelyn nodded. "I know, officer, I'm sorry, I've been trying to." "Do you understand how dangerous that is?" he interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "You could cause an accident, you could hurt someone." "I understand," she said quietly. "I really do, I'm going to have to issue citations for both violations." He pulled out his ticket book, flipping it open. "And I'm impounding the vehicle." Her breath caught, impounding. Standard procedure for expired registration over 60 days. But I need my car, I work nights. The buses don't run that late where I. You should have thought of that before you broke the law. The rain pounded the pavement between them. Evelyn stood there, soaked to the bone, her hands trembling, not from cold, but from the realization of what was about to happen. An officer, Derek Kane, who believed in walls and lines and the unshakable rightness of the law, had no idea that this moment would change everything he thought he knew about justice. Derek returned to his patrol car and ran her information through the system. Clean record, not even a parking ticket. He frowned. Something about that bothered him, though he couldn't say why. He filled out the citations methodically, the numbers adding up quickly. Broken brake light, $250. Expired registration, $450. Impound fee, $350. Towing, $200. Late registration penalties, $4,800. Total, $6,050. He stared at the number for a moment. It was high, higher than usual, but the system didn't lie. She'd let her registration lapse for 2 months. That triggered the escalated penalty structure the city had implemented last year. Revenue generation, they called it. Public safety, they said. He walked back to her car and handed her the citation through the window. Evelyn looked at the paper and her face went pale. Her lips moved silently as she read the total. Once, twice, as if reading it again might change the number. 6,000, she whispered. $6,050, Derek corrected. You have 30 days to pay or your license will be suspended. She looked up at him and for the first time he saw something crack in her composure. Not anger, not defiance, just disbelief. Officer, I don't have that kind of money. You can set up a payment plan at the municipal court. I work as a nurse's aide, she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. I make $14 an hour. After rent and food, I barely. She stopped, swallowing hard. Please, isn't there anything? The fine is what it is, ma'am. But $6,000 for a brake light. An expired registration, he added, as if that justified everything. Evelyn stared at the paper in her hands. $6,000. It might as well have been $6 million. She thought of the envelope in her kitchen drawer, $230 saved over months. She thought of her patients, the ones who depended on her. She thought of the buses that didn't run to her neighborhood after 10 p.m. What about my car? She asked. Tow truck's on the way. You'll get a notice about where to pick it up once you've paid the fines and the impound fees. How am I supposed to get to work? Derek's jaw tightened. He'd heard this before, the excuses, the sob stories, the attempts to manipulate him into bending the rules. He'd learned long ago not to listen. The law didn't care about your problems. It only cared about compliance. That's not my concern, ma'am. Evelyn nodded slowly. She folded the citation carefully and slipped it into her jacket pocket. Then she looked at him, really looked at him, and said something he wasn't expecting. I'll pray for you, officer. Derek blinked. Excuse me. I'll pray for you, she repeated gently. That God gives you peace. You look like you're carrying something heavy. And before he could respond, the tow truck arrived, its yellow lights flashing through the rain like a warning he was too stubborn to heed. Evelyn stood on the sidewalk, watching as the tow truck hoisted her car into the air. The chain rattled and clanked, and her heart sank with every inch it rose. That car had been with her through everything. Her late husband's funeral, her daughter's college graduation, countless midnight drives to the hospital when someone needed her. Now it was gone. The tow truck driver handed her a pink slip and drove off without a word. Officer Kane was still there, sitting in his patrol car, filling out paperwork. She could see his silhouette through the rain-streaked windshield. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. She wanted to ask him if he had any idea what $6,000 meant to someone like her. But she didn't. Instead, she pulled her thin jacket tighter and started walking. The rain soaked through her scrubs. Her shoes squelched with every step. The streets were empty, the city quiet except for the hiss of tires on wet pavement and the distant wail of a siren. She had 4 miles to walk, maybe 5, she wasn't sure anymore. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her supervisor at the hospital. "Can you pick up an extra shift tomorrow? We're short-staffed." Evelyn stared at the message. She thought about saying no. She thought about explaining that she didn't have a car anymore, that she couldn't afford the fine, that the system had just crushed her beneath its heel for the crime of being poor. But instead she typed, "I'll be there." Because that's what she always did. She showed up. She endured. She carried burdens that weren't hers to carry because someone had to. Back in his patrol car, Derek watched her walk away. He told himself he'd done the right thing. The law was the law. If he started making exceptions, where would it end? But something gnawed at him. He thought about her words, "I'll pray for you." No one had said that to him in years. Not since his mother passed. Not since he'd built walls so high that even kindness couldn't climb them. He shook his head and pulled back onto the road. He had 3 more hours on his shift. There were other violations to catch, other laws to enforce. But as he drove through the rain, he couldn't shake the image of Evelyn Harper walking alone into the storm, her shoulders square, her head unbowed. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the badge, beneath the uniform, beneath 15 years of believing that order and justice were the same thing, a small crack appeared in the wall he'd built around his heart. 3 days later, Derek Kane was back on patrol when the call came through. "All units, we have a medical emergency at St. Michael's Hospital, requesting traffic control for incoming ambulances." Derek responded and headed toward the hospital. When he arrived, the emergency bay was chaos, paramedics rushing, doctors shouting orders, nurses moving with practiced urgency. He parked and stepped out, directing traffic away from the ambulance lane. That's when he saw her. Evelyn Harper in her scrubs, holding the hand of an elderly man on a gurney. She was speaking to him softly, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. The man's eyes were wide with fear, but as she spoke, his breathing slowed. His grip on her hand relaxed. Derek watched transfixed. A doctor rushed past. "Evie, we need you in room 4. "I'll be right there, Dr. Patel," she called back. Then she leaned down and whispered something to the elderly man, something Derek couldn't hear, and the man smiled. She released his hand and hurried toward the ER doors. That's when she saw Derek. Their eyes met across the crowded bay. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Evelyn nodded just once, a small acknowledgement, and disappeared inside. Derek stood there, rain beginning to fall again, and something shifted. He'd seen her at her lowest, stranded, fined into oblivion, humiliated. And yet here she was, still showing up, still caring for others, still carrying a light that refused to go out. Later that night, Derek sat in his apartment staring at the citation report on his laptop. Evelyn Harper, $6,050, clean record, 32 years at St. Michael's. He pulled up the city's escalated penalty policy. It was designed to generate revenue, buried in bureaucratic language that made it sound like public safety. But it wasn't justice. It was a trap, and he'd been the one to spring it. For the first time in 15 years, Officer Derek Kane questioned the wall he'd built his life upon. And in that quiet moment, alone with his conscience, he made a choice. The next morning, Derek walked into the precinct earlier than usual. His captain, a gruff man named Williams, was already at his desk, nursing black coffee and sorting through reports. "Kane," Williams grunted, "you're here early." "Captain, I need to talk to you about a citation I issued last week." Williams glanced up. "What about it?" "Evelyn Harper, $6,000 fine for a broken brake light and expired registration. So, system calculated it. What's the problem? Derek took a breath. The problem is that it's excessive. She's a nurse's aide. Clean record for 32 years. She works nights at St. Michael's. That fine will destroy her. Williams leaned back in his chair. The law doesn't care about feelings, Kane. You know that better than anyone. I know, but doesn't something feel wrong about this? Wrong, Williams laughed, a short, bitter sound. The city council approved those penalties. They want revenue. We enforce it. That's the job. What if the job is wrong? The words hung in the air like smoke. Williams set down his coffee slowly. You questioning me, officer? No, sir, I'm questioning myself. Derek left the precinct and drove to St. Michael's Hospital. He found Evelyn in the break room, sitting alone with a cup of tea. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her shoulders sagging with the weight of too many shifts, too many burdens. She looked up when he entered, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Officer Kane, she said quietly. Miss Harper, he cleared his throat, may I sit? She gestured to the chair across from her. Derek sat, his hands folded on the table. I've been thinking about what happened, about the fine, about everything. Evelyn said nothing, just watched him with those patient, knowing eyes. I wanted to apologize, Derek continued. Not just for the citation, but for the way I treated you, like you were just another violation, like you didn't matter. You were doing your job, Evelyn said gently. Was I? Derek looked down at his hands. Or was I hiding behind a badge because it was easier than seeing people as people? Evelyn reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her touch was warm, steady. We all carry things we shouldn't have to, she said. The question is what we do with them. Do we let them make us hard, or do we let them make us kind? Derek felt something break inside him, something that had been holding him together for years, but had also been holding him back. I want to help, he said. I don't know how, but I want to make this right. Evelyn smiled, a small, sad, hopeful smile. Then help me understand, she said. Help me see why the law says I owe $6,000 for trying to get to work. And in that moment, Derek Kane realized that justice wasn't about walls and lines and rigid compliance. It was about mercy, about seeing the humanity in others, about choosing kindness when the system demanded cruelty. Over the next week, Derek did something he'd never done before. He researched. He pulled files on every citation issued under the escalated penalty policy, hundreds of them, thousands of dollars extracted from people who could least afford it, single mothers, elderly veterans, minimum wage workers like Evelyn. The city had collected over $2 million in the past year alone. Revenue generation, they called it, but Derek saw it for what it really was, a tax on poverty. He printed everything and took it to his captain. Williams, we need to talk about these penalties. The captain looked at the stack of papers and sighed. Kane, drop it. I can't. You want to keep your job. I want to do the right thing. Williams stood and walked to the window, hands in his pockets. You know what happens to cops who rock the boat? They drown. The system doesn't change because one officer grows a conscience. Then maybe it's time more of us grew one. Williams turned, his expression hard. You're walking a dangerous line, Kane. Maybe, but I'd rather walk a dangerous line than hide behind a wall. Derek left the precinct and drove to the municipal courthouse. He requested to speak with Judge Rebecca Morales, a woman known for her fairness and her willingness to listen. She agreed to see him during her lunch break. Officer Kane, she said, gesturing to a chair in her chambers, what can I do for you? Derek laid out everything, the escalated penalties, the cases like Evelyn's, the revenue-driven enforcement that was crushing the city's most vulnerable residents. Judge Morales listened, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. "I've seen these cases," she said quietly. "They've been bothering me for months, but my hands are tied. The penalties are set by city ordinance. I can only apply the law as written." "What if we challenged it?" Derek asked. "On what grounds?" "Excessive fines, Eighth Amendment. These penalties aren't about public safety, they're about revenue. That's unconstitutional." Judge Morales leaned back, fingers steepled beneath her chin. "You'd need a plaintiff, someone willing to fight." Derek thought of Evelyn Harper, walking alone in the rain, her dignity intact despite everything the system had thrown at her. "I know someone," he said. That evening, Derek returned to St. Michael's. He found Evelyn finishing her shift, pulling on her thin jacket in the employee locker room. "Miss Harper," he said, "can we talk?" She looked at him, wary but willing. They sat in the hospital cafeteria, empty except for a janitor mopping the floors in the far corner. Derek explained everything: the research, the judge, the possibility of challenging the penalties in court. "But it would require you to be the plaintiff," he said, "to stand up and fight, and I know that's asking a lot." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold. "All my life," she said finally, "I've kept my head down, worked hard, followed the rules, and still it feels like the system is designed to keep people like me down." "It is," Derek said, "and that's why we need to change it." Evelyn looked at him, and in her eyes he saw something he'd missed before. Not just patience, not just kindness, but strength. The kind of strength that endures, that bends but never breaks. "If I do this," she said, "it's not just for me. It's for everyone like me. Everyone who's been crushed by fines they can't pay, by a system that profits from their poverty." "I know." She nodded slowly. "Then I'll do it." And in that moment, a nurse's aide and a police officer became allies in a fight for something bigger than either of them. Justice that looked like mercy, and mercy that looked like love. The hearing took place 6 weeks later in Judge Morales's courtroom. It wasn't a grand trial, just a preliminary hearing to determine whether there was enough evidence to challenge the city's penalty ordinance. Evelyn sat at the plaintiff's table, wearing her best dress, a simple navy blue one she'd worn to her husband's funeral years ago. Her hands were folded in her lap, steady despite the weight of what she was about to do. Derek sat behind her, in uniform, his presence a quiet statement: "I stand with her." The city's attorney, a slick man named Gregory Foster, argued that the penalties were necessary for public safety, that they deterred dangerous behavior, that Miss Harper had simply failed to comply with the law. "The law applies equally to everyone," Foster said, his voice smooth and confident. "Regardless of income, regardless of circumstance, that's what makes it fair." Then it was Evelyn's turn to speak. She stood slowly, her legs trembling, and walked to the witness stand. Judge Morales looked at her with kind eyes. "Miss Harper," the judge said gently, "please tell the court in your own words what happened." Evelyn took a breath. "I work nights at St. Michael's Hospital," she began. "I've been there for 32 years. I care for people at the end of their lives, people who are scared, who are alone, who need someone to hold their hand and tell them it's going to be okay." Her voice was soft but steady, each word carrying the weight of lived experience. "I drive an old car because it's all I can afford. I was saving to fix the brake light. I'd put aside $230, $10 at a time, because that's all I had left after rent and food." She looked at the city's attorney, then at the judge. "I'm not asking to break the law. I'm asking if the law is just. Because $6,000 for a brake light and a registration sticker, that's not justice. That's punishment for being poor." Foster started to object, but Judge Morales raised her hand. "Let her finish." Evelyn continued. "I've spent my whole life trying to do right. I've never hurt anyone. I've never stolen anything. I work hard. I pay my bills. I show up even when I'm tired. And still, I'm told I'm a danger, that I deserve to lose my car, my livelihood, my dignity, all because I couldn't afford to fix a brake light fast enough. Tears streamed down her face now, but her voice didn't waver. If the law says that's fair, she said, then the law is broken. The courtroom was silent. Judge Morales looked at Foster. Does the city have a response? Foster opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, he had nothing to say. The judge turned to Evelyn. Thank you, Miss Harper, you may step down. 2 weeks later, Judge Morales issued her ruling. The escalated penalty ordinance was declared unconstitutional, an excessive fine that violated the Eighth Amendment. The city was ordered to refund all penalties collected under the policy and to implement a fair, income-based fine structure. Evelyn Harper's fine was dismissed. When Derek heard the news, he drove straight to the hospital. He found Evelyn in the parking lot about to start her shift. She was walking, still without a car, but her steps were lighter, her shoulders less burdened. "Miss Harper," he called. She turned, and when she saw him, she smiled. Derek crossed the parking lot and stopped in front of her, suddenly unsure what to say. "We won," he said finally. Evelyn nodded. "We did." "I'm sorry," Derek said, "for everything, for not seeing you, for hiding behind the law when I should have been looking for justice." Evelyn reached out and took his hand. "You found your way," she said. "That's what matters." Derek felt tears prick his eyes, tears he hadn't let himself cry in 15 years. "Thank you," he whispered, "for teaching me what justice really looks like." Evelyn squeezed his hand. "It looks like mercy, Officer Kane. It always has." 3 months later, Officer Derek Kane stood in front of a room full of new police recruits at the academy. He'd been asked to give a talk on community policing, but he knew what he really needed to talk about was something deeper. "I spent 15 years believing that law and justice were the same thing," he began. "I thought that if I just followed the rules, enforced the code, kept the line, I'd be doing right. But I was wrong." The recruits listened, young faces eager and uncertain. "Justice isn't about walls," Derek continued. "It's not about power or control or making people comply. Justice is about seeing people, really seeing them, and asking yourself, am I making their life better, or am I just making them smaller?" He thought of Evelyn Harper, walking in the rain, her dignity intact despite everything. "There was a woman who taught me that. She didn't do it with anger or defiance. She did it with grace, with patience, with a kindness I didn't deserve. And because of her, I learned that the law is a tool, but mercy is the hand that wields it." He paused, looking at each recruit. "You're going to be given power, a badge, a gun, authority. And every day you'll have to choose what kind of officer you want to be. The kind who hides behind the wall, or the kind who tears it down to help someone on the other side." The room was silent. "Choose kindness," Derek said. "Every time, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because that's what justice really looks like." Evelyn Harper continued working at St. Michael's Hospital. The city returned the money they'd taken from her, and she used it to buy a new car, nothing fancy, just reliable. She still picked up extra shifts. She still held the hands of dying patients. She still showed up, day after day, with a heart full of grace. And sometimes, on her way home from work, she'd pass Officer Derek Kane on patrol. They'd wave. A small gesture, a reminder of the moment when mercy met the law and mercy won. Because in the end, kindness is always stronger than anger. Forgiveness always heals more than punishment. And justice, true justice, looks like a woman walking in the rain, refusing to let the storm steal her light.